I've always remembered the names that weren't on the list, not because I expected mine to be there, but because I noticed when it wasn't. There's a particular stillness that follows omission, quieter than silence, but sharper. I opened the group message Maggie forwarded, eyes moving down the string of emails. Ashley, Mom, Uncle Greg, Walter Green's assistant. For some reason, even the church secretary. My name didn't appear. Not in the to, not in the CC, not even misspelled. The title was 6 Months of Remembering. Rick with a white dove in the banner, and Ashley's new home listed as the gathering place. I held the phone a little longer than I needed to, waiting for something to shift. It didn't. Maggie's reply came 15 minutes later. I thought you knew. I think maybe they didn't think you'd come. She didn't say who they were. She didn't need to. The line landed like a damp towel, not heavy, just suffocating. I didn't respond. I just laid the phone face down next to the lavender glass vase. The vase had dust in its ridges. I wiped it out with a corner of my sleeve and placed a small bundle of dried lavender inside. I'd kept the bundle in a drawer for months, wrapped in brown paper, with Rick's initials written faintly on the tag. He never liked it too strong, just enough to remind me of France. He once murmured, not even looking up from his paper. I thought about bringing wine, but wine said celebration, and whatever this was, it didn't feel like that. The lavender would do. The drive was familiar. I had taken it dozens of times before, birthdays, book clubs, even once, for a 4th of July barbecue where Ashley had ordered sparklers with everyone's name engraved on the stem. Mine said Mrs. R. Whittaker in thin cursive. She thought it was elegant. I pretended it was. At the final turn I slowed. Ashley's new house was larger than her last. Polished stone steps, 2 ornamental maple trees, one slightly crooked. There were cars out front, voices carried from the backyard glass, clinking laughter too practiced. No one looked toward the street. I stepped out and stood at the curb for a moment, lavender in hand. I thought maybe someone would notice. Maybe a curtain would shift. Maybe a child would run toward the door with the simple certainty that visitors should be welcomed. The front gate was latched, not locked, just enough resistance to make opening it a decision. I didn't open it. I turned the vase slowly in my hand, checking the papal tag again, as if the initials had changed. It wasn't until later that I saw the photos. Maggie had shared a post on her page, nothing dramatic, just a quiet caption, remembering Rick with love. 4 images. One of Rick's framed photo on a table beside a flickering candle. One of Ashley, standing with Mom and Uncle Greg, holding glasses of white wine. One of the whole group smiling on the porch. One of a cake shaped like a briefcase. In none of them was there any sign that Rick had ever had a wife. I scrolled twice then, again slower. My eyes kept landing on Ashley's hand on Mom's arm, on the matching blue dresses, on the fact that my chair, the one Rick had picked for our anniversary, the one with carved arms and a squeaky back, was now on Ashley's porch. I clicked the caption to see the comments. Such a beautiful tribute. He'd be proud. You all look so strong. He loved you dearly. Miss him every day. Ashley, you're holding the family together. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe just a mention, a name, even just his wife. There was nothing. I didn't call Ashley. I didn't text Mom. I didn't comment. I simply turned off the screen. The lavender vase felt heavier as I walked back to the car, as if it had absorbed the silence somehow. I placed it gently on the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel, both hands folded in my lap. My wedding ring pressed slightly against the base of my thumb. I hadn't worn it in weeks, but Today I had slipped it on without thinking. The edge had dulled. A faint line of skin had formed beneath it, like the memory of pressure. I drove home slowly. Maggie's message blinked once before I reached the driveway. "Are you okay?" I didn't reply. I took the vase inside, set it back on the shelf above the fireplace, and turned it just enough so the tick faced away. Then I sat down, hands open, as if I'd forgotten what to hold on to. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I didn't imagine alternate versions of the evening where the door opened or someone said my name out loud. I just listened to nothing in particular, and I thought not for the first time, but maybe for the last. There is a difference between being forgotten and being erased. Some things aren't noticed until they're missing, like being asked what I think. It used to be enough to arrive on time, carry the right dish, keep my voice level. I learned early that compliance is quieter than confrontation. When the table was set and the wine poured, I'd wait for someone to mention the meal, or the flowers I brought, or the way I'd coordinated the napkins with the plates. They didn't most of the time, but I kept bringing them. Ashley liked lemon tarts. I found the recipe in a French cookbook Rick brought back from a conference in Montreal. The first time I made them, she took two, said nothing, and left the dish unwashed on the patio table. I washed it myself when the guests were gone, using the citrus sponge Rick once teased me about. You really have a sponge for everything. Ashley borrowed money the year she switched jobs. Just a short stretch between paychecks she'd texted, followed by a winking emoji. I transferred the amount the same evening. No contract, no reminder. She never mentioned it again. At Christmas that year, she gave everyone monogrammed throws. Mine had no initials. Rick thought silence meant approval. Whenever I offered suggestions, soft ones with the edges filed down, he would tilt his head and half smile like a man indulging an opinion he'd already dismissed. Walter knows how to handle it. Don't trouble yourself, he once said, not looking up from his tablet. I remember the soft tap of his finger scrolling past something. That small sound stayed longer in the room than my words. At dinner with his colleagues, I would listen more than speak. Someone would mention a merger. Someone else would nod at Rick. If I did speak, it was usually to support, not interrupt. He's been working hard, I once offered. A woman I didn't know smiled without warmth. Oh, we know. He tells us everything. She didn't mean it kindly. I bought a blouse, once ivory, with a pearl button at the collar. Rick noticed as I walked down the stairs. You're not usually one for statements, he said. It's nice you're trying something. I folded it into the back of the closet that night. The pearl button came off a week later and rolled under the bed. I never looked for it. Maggie once watched me refill coffee for everyone at a brunch Ashley hosted. I had placed sugar cubes in a small dish and folded the napkins into triangles. It wasn't asked of me, but it felt necessary. Maggie waited until we were alone to speak. You don't have to fold yourself in half to fit. I didn't answer. She reached for the cream slowly. Do you ever wonder if you've made too much space for other people? There wasn't a reply that felt true and safe at the same time. I sniffed and passed the spoon. At Easter, I made name cards out of pressed violets. Ashley rearranged the table just before guests arrived and left mine in the kitchen. I found it beside a damp dish towel. Place cards are a little much, she had muttered, mostly to the room. Rick didn't look up. Once, I tried to ask him if we could plan a short trip, just the two of us. I had circled dates in the calendar and mentioned a cabin someone was renting. Things are complicated with the company, he said. You wouldn't understand all of it, and that's fine. He said fine like a lid placed firmly on a pot. Children had been a closed subject. We'd talked about it once early on. Rick had leaned back in the booth of a dim Italian restaurant and traced a circle in the condensation of his water glass. Not everyone needs a legacy to be fulfilled. I had nodded. It sounded poetic at the time. Now I realized the tablecloth had a stain in the corner. I'd noticed it then too, but said nothing. I kept birthday lists, allergy notes, favorite wines. I offered to drive when someone else had a headache. I smiled when the stories turned to family vacations I hadn't been invited to, or meetings I'd known nothing about. Rick always said I was the constant he meant it as praise. The one who never rattles, he used to say. Maggie once brought over a stack of photo albums she'd found while clearing out an attic box. She ran her hand over one of the covers. There are whole chapters where you're not in the story. I looked through the pages. Christmas. Lake weekend. A baby shower for Ashley's friend. My name wasn't written in any caption. Neither was Rick's handwriting. Maggie tapped one corner. That's your teacup. You're cropped out. She didn't mean to hurt me, but even truth wears sharp shoes. At Rick's memorial, I stood near the coffee table in the back. People passed through like wind-short hugs, too many platitudes. Ashley spoke by the framed portrait. She wore pearls. She was part of his routine, I heard someone whisper behind me. But Ashley brought him back to life. I didn't turn around. Instead, I held my empty cup, a little tighter thumb against the faint crack near the rim. It had been Rick's favorite mug once. He had stopped using it without saying why. I held it anyway, and I wondered how long someone can stand in the middle of a room before others forget they were ever there. Some drawers stay closed not because we forget, but because we already know what isn't inside them. I left the cabinet in Rick's study untouched longer than I care to admit. When I finally opened it, the labels were still crisp. He had written them by hand, block letters in blue ink, each one underlined in twice, taxes, clients, legal, personal. The kind of precision that never invited interruption. I reached for the personal folder last. Inside were cards, birthdays, thank you notes, letters written in smooth, expensive ink. None were from me. The handwriting ranged from floral to clinical. A few lines stood out more than others. Thank you for reminding me who I used to be. You gave me space to breathe again. One envelope was sealed with gold wax. No return name, just the initial L etched in the corner. I unfolded the letter slowly. Thank you for helping me find freedom again. I turned it over, half expecting something else. There wasn't. I thought about the card I once left in his suitcase just before he flew to New York for a conference. I had written it in the kitchen, barefoot, listening to the kettle click. I tucked it into the zippered sleeve of his laptop case. He said he'd carry it with him. It wasn't here. Neither was the hotel note I'd slipped under his pillow in Savannah, or the small hand-drawn card from our 6th anniversary, you and me then and now. I checked the folders again, slower. They weren't missing. They had never been included. There were Polaroids stored in an envelope labeled Old Trips. One showed Ashley and Rick, sitting too close for coincidence, the kind of closeness that settles in when no one else is supposed to notice. Her hand rested near his, not touching, but not entirely separate. She wore a scarf I had once lent her, a soft cashmere blend, oatmeal-coloured. I hadn't seen it in years. In the bottom drawer, I found a hard drive labelled W Archive. When I opened it, folder names lined the screen. Lake House, Dallas Retreat, June 16, birthday Ashley. The contents didn't surprise me, but the consistency did. Group photos at someone's cabin, shots of Rick and Walter clinking glasses, Ashley cutting a cake while Rick held the knife steady beside her. In one, Laura, younger than the one I remembered from a benefit gala, smiled at Rick across a candle-lit table. Her wine glass was half full. His hand rested flat against the tablecloth ring turned inward. No photos of me. I clicked a folder titled Speeches. One document was labeled Emily. Remarks. It held 4 lines. Keep it warm. No finance. Nothing too long. Smile if she gets off track. I scrolled. Nothing more. I didn't print it. I didn't close it either. I just let the screen go dim. There was a black notebook on the second shelf, the same one I gave him the year he made partner navy leather silver-edged pages. I remember because the woman at the store said it was a good weight for men who write without rushing. I had written inside the front cover, in small block letters, to write the things you never say out loud. The pages were blank. All of them. The ribbon bookmark still sat at the first third, untouched. I sat in his chair, letting the cushion dip beneath my weight. My legs didn't quite reach the floor unless I stretched. Rick once said the seat had just enough give, like a man complimenting a well-tailored suit. I touched the edge of the armrest. A small groove, nearly invisible, sat just below where his hand would rest. I hadn't noticed it before. I remembered standing in front of a mirror once rehearsing my remarks for a non-profit conference. I had triple-printed the speech, circled keywords, practiced breathing in, pauses. Before I left, Rick glanced at me briefly. Try not to lose them. They don't do well with density. He didn't attend. He sent flowers, tulips, not lilies, because I once mentioned lilies made me sneeze. The card read, "Proud of you. Let's talk tonight." He was asleep when I got home. In a small file labeled Holidays, I found a video clip. Ashley giving toasts at Thanksgiving. Maggie laughed in the background. Mom clapped. I could hear my voice off-screen offering to refill the wine. Ashley's reply was clear. "That's sweet. Let's not let her pour. It'll get too generous." Laughter followed. Rick didn't interrupt. One Thanksgiving, Ashley passed out silver boxes with handwritten notes tucked inside. Maggie's said, "To my compass, Mom's, the one who always steadies us." Rick's read to, "The man who always made it feel like home." Mine had no note, just an empty slip. Ashley looked up briefly. "I'll write it later." She didn't. I found my old linen apron folded behind the door, the one I used to wear when cooking for his team. There was a faint coffee stain near the left hip. Rick had once told me it looked too domestic for boardrooms. I stopped wearing it, but I hadn't thrown it away. The cabinet held its order long after I stood up. Nothing inside had moved on its own, though I half expected something to shift, as if acknowledgement might unlock revision. It didn't. There's a difference I've learned between not being chosen and not being remembered. One leaves a question, the other a fact. Some things look official because they are meant to feel final. The envelope had a weight to it thicker than regular mail. I ran my finger beneath the flap, unfolded the document slowly, line by line, the way I've learnt to read things that weren't written for me. Peter Langford's name was at the top. The firm's header still used the old serif font Rick disliked. He used to say it looked too traditional to be credible. He preferred clean lines and sans serif trust. The subject line, "Notice of transfer, Whitestone Holdings." The line that stopped me sat near the center of the page. All executive and managerial rights transferred to A. Whitaker, per updated agreement, filed 6 weeks prior to Richard Whitaker's death. There was no E. Whitakers anywhere. I looked again. Not even in the carbon copy. I turned the page over hoping for a postscript, hoping for context, hoping for a mistake. There wasn't even a watermark. I set the letter down beside the sugar jar, the one with a chipped lid I never replaced. The crack had grown a little wider since winter. I hadn't noticed until that moment. I opened Ashley's LinkedIn out of habit, more than curiosity. I had memorized her professional photo long ago, head tilted slightly blazer, a shade too sharp. Caption: Creative strategist family, steward, legacy builder. Below it, a new headline: Managing partner, Whitestone Holdings, in honor of Rick Whitaker's legacy. There were 214 likes. I scrolled through the comments. Maggie's was short. You were always the strong one. Someone else had posted, he left it in the right hands. The word left did something strange in my throat. I held the phone in my palm for several minutes before calling. Ashley answered on the second ring. You saw the announcement. I didn't reply. I didn't think you'd be surprised. She continued. Rick trusted me with that side of things. He didn't want you burdened. Her voice was steady, like someone reading aloud from a script written by a person who would never be questioned. I'm his wife, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I only wanted to hear it out loud in the air between us. You were his balance. I was the part he could build with. She paused for effect. He gave you the house, the name. You had enough. The line clicked silent. I didn't call again. The kettle had cooled. I poured lukewarm water over an unused tea bag and left it steeping on the counter. Maggie arrived 2 hours later without ringing the bell. She knew I left the door unlocked when I didn't want to be alone, but couldn't bear conversation. She didn't bring flowers. She brought her phone. She held it out without speaking. The screen glowed. Ashley. A post. Smiling beside a brushed metal plaque that read, Whitestone Holdings, Charleston HQ. Caption: For you, Rick, thank you for believing in me. I didn't touch the screen. I didn't blink, either. Maggie stood there holding the phone like a fragile object. Do you want me to say something? She asked eventually. I shook my head. She stayed long enough to boil fresh water, but didn't ask me to drink it. Later, I went to the garage. Zaj, the one Rick always kept locked. The one he said was just storage. The key had sat on the hook for years, oddly shaped, slightly tarnished, never used. I took it without ceremony. Inside, the space smelled of rust and oil, and paper left too long in plastic bins. There were rows of boxes all labelled in Rick's handwriting. One box near the back caught my eye. Laura Hartman. Personal. Next to it, Daniel. Correspondence. The names were unfamiliar, but the handwriting wasn't. Rick always used block letters for storage. Underlining for importance. I didn't open the boxes. Not yet. I sat on the metal stool in the corner, the one with a torn vinyl seat and rust along the base. My knees made a soft sound as I folded onto it. My hands rested in my lap. There were no photos on the walls, no family crests, no sentimental clutter, only silence and the hum of things once hidden. It was a silence that didn't beg to be filled, just acknowledged. The house behind me had clean windows, polished floors, and a pantry alphabetized by spice. This space had none of that. But it had something the rest didn't answer that stopped pretending to be questions. I looked at the boxes again. He had labelled them with care, not discarded, not buried, stored. I traced one edge of the lid with my finger. Dust lifted easily. The cardboard beneath was dry and strong. I didn't lift it. I already knew what the box would say, even if I didn't yet know the words inside. Some losses don't break you. They erase your reflection and wait for you to notice the outline missing. The dealership didn't ask why. was selling the car. They offered a number, printed the form, and handed me a clipboard. Rick's name was still on the original registration, typed in bold, mine added underneath in schmarte font. I signed below the line that used to belong to us both. "You'll want to clear the console," the man at the counter said, motioning toward the key. I nodded, opened the glove box, and removed a folded paper map I had tucked there years ago. Asheville circled in blue pen. We never took the trip. I changed my number that afternoon. The woman at the phone store offered to help transfer my contacts. I declined. The new phone rang once, a test call from Maggie, then silence. No missed calls, no voicemails. Ashley had left one final message the week before. I hadn't listened, but I read the transcript. "We're still family. You don't have to stay gone." The word still sat in the middle like a splinter. I deleted the transcript. At the post office, I returned the RSVP for the Foundation's upcoming gala. The invitation came on cream cardstock, sealed in navy wax. My name was printed in delicate serif Emily Whittaker, guest of honor. I didn't open the envelope all the way. I didn't need to. I logged into the Whittaker Trust portal and removed my name from the advisory board. There was no confirmation screen, just a quiet return to the home page as if nothing had ever happened. I took a screenshot, then deleted it. Peter met me at his office on a cold Wednesday, coat unbuttoned, tie loosened. He glanced at the document I brought. "You're certain?" I nodded once. He didn't argue, only pushed the folder toward me. "We'll transfer the deed." Quietly. I signed where he indicated. The house now belonged to Maggie, held in legal trust under her name. She didn't flinch, only placed her hand flat over the folder. "This isn't retreat," she said. "It's removal." I didn't correct her. The invitation to the Whitestone final review arrived 2 days later. A plain email with black text. "Your attendance is requested as the surviving spouse of Rick Whittaker." No greeting, no signature, just time, date, and boardroom location. I didn't reply. Walter Green called the evening after. His voice was practiced the kind people mistake for warmth. "We'd like your cooperation," he began. "For continuity." I said nothing. "The press will ask about your absence. We've prepared a brief statement, dignified, grateful. You'll be named as Rick's moral compass." My hand rested on the edge of the counter thumb, pressed against the faint mark where a bowl had cracked 2 years ago. "You'll help us by staying steady," he continued. "No interviews, no contradictions." I heard the faint clink of his ring against something glass. Rick used to do that when he needed silence between sentences. "You were part of the structure," he said. Softer. "Let's not dismantle it now." My voice was even. "You built it without me." He exhaled once, sharp and fast. "You don't want to make this public." I ended the call without answering. Maggie came by with tea and fresh bread. She set them down, folded her coat across the back of a chair, and sat without speaking. "They think you'll show up," she said. Finally. I looked at the blank invitation, still sitting near the sink. "They always think that." She poured the tea. No sugar, no lemon, just warmth and steam and quiet. I updated my tax information online. I filed separately. For the first time in 15 years, the box marked married was left unchecked. I removed my name from the Whittaker estate filing. Peter processed it within the day. He called to confirm. I let it go to voicemail. The final email from Ashley arrived at dusk. No subject line, just 3 lines. "You don't have to be cold. We could have shared it. He wanted you to feel honored. You were the steady one. I read it twice, then deleted it. There was a photo I kept in a drawer, one no one else had seen. I had taken it in the backyard the day Rick signed the initial business papers for Whitestone. He wasn't in the photo. Just a table, 2 glasses of iced tea, and the corner of my sweater sleeve as I reached for the folder. I had worn that sweater until the cuffs unraveled. It still sat folded in the back of the closet, faintly smelling of old paper and dust. When the official statement went live, Maggie read it out loud. The future of Whitestone rests with those Rick trusted most. We move forward in gratitude, guided by legacy. She lowered the paper. They didn't include you. I folded the note Peter had written with the final deed and slipped it into a manila envelope. I didn't respond. Maggie stood in the doorway before leaving. They expect silence to mean surrender. I reached for the chipped mug Rick once said looked too handmade. The handle had a crack, faint but permanent. Sometimes I said it means freedom. She didn't speak again. I left the invitation on the counter. I didn't return the call. I didn't ask for acknowledgement. I didn't knock on any doors. I didn't walk away to punish anyone. I walked away because they built a room and forgot I was ever in it. I never liked silence until I understood it wasn't empty. I bought the green kettle on a Tuesday. No one helped me choose it. It was dull, a colour between moss and fatigue, with a faint chip along the lid's edge. It whistled too early, too shrill, but the sound filled the house evenly. I placed it on the back burner and timed my breath with its hiss. I never filled it more than halfway. 1 cup was enough. Lavender grew slowly. I didn't plant it for anyone this time. The soil in Colorado felt coarse in my hands, unforgiving in a way that suited me. The first few stalks curled in on themselves. The nursery woman told me to give it time to mix sand into the dirt and stop watching it so closely. I did what she said, though I kept watching. I still do. The house I rented had uneven floors and 1 working heater. There was a shelf near the back door, just big enough for boots and a folded sweater. I lined it with a tea towel I'd brought from the old kitchen, the one with a faded stain that looked like a wine ring, but wasn't. Rick never noticed it. He preferred white linens, crisp and exact. I use the towel every day now. Not to cover anything, just to remind myself I don't need to. At the bookstore, I learned how to keep my voice low without shrinking. Customers liked that. They asked for titles I'd never read. I pointed, without guessing, let them fill in the blanks. The corner I worked in smelled like old ink and lemon oil. I polished each magazine's spine until it stopped feeling like a job. I left the lights off when no one was there. Dust floated better in dim rooms. You don't look like someone who's from here, the owner said once, not unkindly. I'm not from anywhere right now. That was enough. The chipped mug I used each morning came from a clearance rack. It had a blue rim and a hairline crack that curved like a question. I kept it on the windowsill, where the light could catch the imperfection. I didn't mind if it broke. Not everything has to last. Maggie's postcard arrived with no greeting, just a line in her hand. The air out here makes everything feel smaller. I reread it during quiet shifts and kept it behind the register between 2 coasters shaped like leaves. I never told her I got it. Walter's name surfaced in a community newsletter, one of those polished charity features that never says too much. He wore a tailored suit. Ashley stood behind him, her hand resting lightly on a plaque etched with Rick's name. I didn't click the article. I didn't need to. There was a voicemail from an unknown number. I didn't check it for 3 days. The transcript read, You can't just disappear, Emily. No punctuation. No name. I saved it anyway. I've learned that silence isn't absence. It's a boundary. One evening I dreamed of Rick. He sat at his old desk, the one with the green lamp and the drawer that never shut right. He didn't speak. I didn't interrupt. The room was still suspended like a held breath. He wrote something on yellow paper, eyes down, never lifting. I stood behind him, not waiting, just there. When I woke, the light in the hallway had burned out. I replaced the bulb with one slightly too dim. I preferred it that way. My neighbor across the road has a grey dog that doesn't bark. Sometimes she waves when she waters the hedge. I wave back. We've never exchanged words. I like that. I started baking on weekends. Nothing complicated, just things that filled the house with time. A cracked pie dish, a fork that doesn't match any other in the drawer. I burned a batch once and didn't scrape the pan. I left it in the sink and went outside instead. Ashley's last email stayed unread. Subject line, foreclosure. I didn't open it. The lavender had just begun to bloom again, and I didn't want to carry her voice into the garden. Some things only bloom in silence. The key to Rick's garage is still in a drawer I rarely open. I found it next to the receipt for our honeymoon flights. I didn't know I'd kept it. The ink has faded into a pale rust. I didn't throw it out. Not out of reverence, just acknowledgement. At the shop, a child once handed me a drawing of a house with smoke curling from the chimney. She pointed to the window and said, "That's the part where you live." I pinned it behind the register. She never came back. On my walk home, I count the mailboxes with red flags raised. I don't know the names of the families inside, but I like knowing someone still expects a letter. I stopped wearing black, not out of resistance, just because the green sweater I found at a second-hand stall fit too well to pass by. It had a missing button near the collar. I stitched it with grey thread and didn't match the rest. That was the point. I bought a second lavender plant. Planted it beside the first. It took root more easily than the first one. I don't water it on schedule anymore, just when the soil feels ready. Every night I fold the grey blanket twice before setting it over the couch. The corners don't align perfectly. I let them be. There are no more questions to answer, no tables to set, no expectations to perform. I make tea for one. I don't wait for it to cool. And when I pass the mirror on the way to bed, I don't turn my head anymore. I meet my own eyes, and nothing moves beneath the surface. That, I think, is enough. Ashley's name blinked on the screen like a headline I didn't subscribe to. Her message came with a single wave emoji and 3 lines. "Hey Em, hope Colorado's been peaceful. Just wondering if we could chat sometime. Nothing urgent." The lavender by the kitchen window had bloomed unevenly this season. I traced the glass with a fingertip where the condensation settled, then deleted the message without replying. I kept a black spiral notebook on the corner of the table, half covered by a faded linen napkin. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "If they return for advantage." Oh no, the ink didn't bleed, not even a little, just stayed there confident and dry. Ashley called 2 days later. Her voice had that same over-polished smoothness I remembered from wedding toasts and charity auctions. I know what Rick left behind. It's complicated. The words were crisp, but her breath caught once at the word complicated, like it meant something heavy when it landed in her mouth. We're just hoping to pull through this together. I didn't speak, not even a murmur. I folded a dish towel over the edge of the counter and pressed it down with one hand. She waited a few seconds longer, then exhaled like she'd finished a performance. "I mean, people are watching Em. The media. Investors. It's not personal. When the line went quiet, I listened to the nothing that came after. The next morning, an envelope slid under the door of the bookstore. No return address, just a single word handwritten on the front, Emily. Inside was a printed email forwarded by Walter Green, with one phrase circled in red marker. We must present a unified front for the press. Beneath it, he'd written in blue ink, I trust you'll understand the importance of discretion. I folded the page into thirds and placed it under the kettle. The bottom of the metal was still warm. The article came out later that week. A friend at the cafe handed me a copy of the financial magazine, like it was a kind of courtesy. The headline stretched across the cover, Whittaker Turmoil Widow Sister, and the legacy without a name. There was a picture of Ashley, walking out of a courthouse, chin-lifted sunglasses sculpted to her face like armor. Beneath it, a quote, This family has always valued unity. Rick would have wanted us to carry on together. They never mentioned me by name. I'm just the late founder's spouse, currently residing out of state, as though I'd melted into the geography. Maggie texted, You okay? You don't have to answer, just no. I saw it too. I didn't answer. Instead, I flipped through the pages of the magazine and stopped at the photo of Whitestone Holdings' new executive suite. There was a brass nameplate that read, Ashley Whittaker, Managing Partner, the same title Rick used to hold, different polish, same veneer. That night I brewed chamomile tea and set the old chipped mug on the table, the same one Rick once said didn't match the sets. I kept it anyway. In the quiet, I thought of the moment Walter pulled me aside once after a fundraiser, his fingers brushing the rim of his glass as if choosing the weight of his words. You represent Rick now, Emily. Just try not to overcomplicate the public image. I had nodded then, holding my purse a little tighter, the clasp digging into my palm like a hinge too stubborn to close. Now I watched the steam curl out of the mug. It carried nothing with it. No scent, no story, no claim. The following day, I sorted old files in the back office of the bookstore. A postcard slipped out from between two outdated catalogues. The front showed a faded roadside diner, the back blank except for one typed phrase, You don't owe them a seat at your table. No stamp. No sender. I tucked it between the pages of my notebook, the one with my sentence scrawled days ago. It felt like it belonged there. Not as proof, just as pause. Later, Ashley tried one more time. Her email read, This isn't about blame, Emily. I know it's been different without him, but we all want what's best for the legacy. Then one last line. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. The only thing harder than being left behind is being summoned when you're convenient. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the edge of the property behind the cabin and stood where the gravel thinned into earth. The lavender had started to bend with the wind, not break. I reached for the smallest stem and pressed it flat inside the back cover of my notebook. No one needed to know what I kept. No one was entitled to what I remembered. And I would not be called back by people who had already erased me once. I closed the notebook. The soft sound it made reminded me of a page being turned without a voice to read it. I didn't notice the shift until nothing pulled me back. The days passed quietly, but they no longer echoed. The old kettle hissed faintly, before boiling the lid, rattling once. I kept it on the lowest flame. There was lavender on the windowsill again, fresher, more upright. I trimmed the stalks without thinking, placed them in the brown glass bottle Maggie had left on my porch months ago. No note, just the bottle, rinsed clean. A message blinked on my phone. I saw you today. There's something steadier in your walk. Maggie never used too many words. I tucked the phone under a napkin and placed my mug precisely in the ring of light on the table. The rim was faintly cracked, not enough to throw it away, not enough to pretend it was whole. At the school library, a boy handed me a drawing of a house with 3 chimneys. "You're Miss Whittaker, right?" I nodded. He didn't wait for more. Neither did I. The name used to feel borrowed. Now it fit like a coat I had mended myself stitches uneven but mine. I reorganized the non-fiction section every Wednesday, not because anyone asked, but because it kept my hands busy. I made a rule that nothing older than 20 years stayed on the front shelf. When the principal mentioned the donation plaque might include staff names, I just said, "Make it small." I don't like large fonts. One morning, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a financial journal folded to an article about Whitestone Holdings. A photo accompanied it. Rick stood beside Ashley, both facing forward, teeth lined up in practiced symmetry. I stared longer than I should have. It didn't sting. It didn't even tighten. Just unfamiliar. As if they had lived in a neighborhood I never moved into. I didn't clip the article. I didn't toss it. I folded it smaller and placed it inside a drawer already filled with things I no longer needed to understand. There was a receipt for gravel, a ribbon from a retirement party I never attended, and a menu card from a wedding I wasn't invited to. They rested flat, not heavy. At the local market, someone waved and said, "You're the quiet one from the library, right?" I nodded again. My name didn't need to follow me loudly. I didn't owe it noise. One Thursday, I walked past a mirror and didn't flinch. I looked older, certainly, but it wasn't age that paused me, it was stillness. Not the kind that holds its breath, but the kind that fills a room gently. The lines around my mouth had settled, not hardened, just stayed. I changed the doormat outside my door. The old one had the initials R&E embroidered faintly in the corner thread, worn down to guesses. The new one simply said, "Welcome." No names, no initials, no declarations. I folded a blue cardigan and noticed the loose thread near the cuff. I didn't trim it. I left it. Imperfect things have the right to remain. There was a moment during a staff meeting when someone asked for my opinion. I gave it. Clear, brief, without adjusting my tone. No one spoke over me. No one needed to. And I didn't need to check if I'd said too much. The silence after was just space, not punishment. Later, I walked home with a paper bag of red apples. One slipped out and rolled onto the pavement. I didn't chase it. I let it rest under the bench, picked up the others, and kept walking. Not everything lost needs to be retrieved. That night, I sat on the porch with a fleece blanket tucked around my knees. The breeze wasn't cold. It just moved things gently out of place. A single moth hovered near the porch light, tapping the glass, as if uncertain whether it belonged inside or out. I watched, without moving. Some things don't need help choosing. In the corner of the room, my old suitcase stayed half unpacked. Not because I might leave again, but because not everything has to be folded tight. I'd kept a notebook inside it, pages mostly blank. On the first line of a fresh sheet I wrote, "I am not missing," then closed the cover. Maggie stopped by with plums once. She didn't stay, just placed the basket by the door and walked off. I didn't call her back. I didn't need her to see what had changed. The basket was enough. In town, someone mentioned the Whittakers. I let the name float by like a balloon on tide. I didn't follow its path. It wasn't mine anymore. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water slowly, letting the steam rise without leaning over it. The mug warmed my palms without asking for anything. I at that not waiting. And for once, nothing in me needed to be proven. I didn't leave anything unlocked. Not the mailbox, not the filing drawer under the desk, not the door to the shed where I once kept boxes labeled with initials no one else recognized. Everything that stayed with me had a key, and I kept them on a single ring, dull and plain. I didn't call ahead before visiting Peter Langford's office. I wore my oldest coat. The lining had come loose at the cuff, but the sleeves still held warmth. His assistant didn't ask questions, just motioned toward the same conference room we once sat in when Rick drafted his third trust. That time, I wasn't allowed to speak. This time, I said only one sentence. I'm not here for negotiation. The folder I handed over held 12 pages each, initialed and notarized. My withdrawal from all contested holdings, not a penny claimed, not a motion filed. On the last page I had handwritten one line in block letters I reserved the right to have spoken, and chose not to. Peter looked down without reaching for it. They'll assume you've lost interest. I nodded. Let them. The phrase had become a kind of refrain. Maggie once said it's what people say when they want you to stop haunting the edges of their comfort. She wasn't wrong. I drove home slowly, not because of snow or fog, but because I wanted to watch the lights change on Main Street. Red to green to yellow to the flicker of someone's porch light across the road. Familiar, like an old pattern I didn't need to name to understand. Once inside, I laid the second copy of the waiver on my table, placed it into an envelope without a return address, and walked it to the post office just before closing. I slipped it into the drop box without looking back. The clerk didn't even glance up, Frau. There was no letter to Rick. I had written one once months earlier. Burned it in a chipped teacup I found behind the shed. All it said was I saw it coming, but you still let it land. Instead, I wrote to Ashley. One sentence. Folded carefully, sealed without flourish. Don't send me invitations to weddings, memorials, or apologies. You may keep the house, the company, and the story. I only keep my name. I signed nothing beneath it. That week I closed 4 bank accounts, cancelled 3 cards, sent Maggie the routing number to the only new account I opened under a different bank in a different county, attached to no shared document. She brought over a tin of cinnamon shortbread and didn't ask questions. She never did. I saw your name on something she mentioned halfway through slicing an apple. A headline. Financial something. It's not my name anymore, I replied, cutting the stem off a sprig of mint. Walter Green left me a voicemail I didn't return. His voice was calm, clipped, slightly forced at the corners. We hope for your cooperation in preserving the family's dignity during this public review. It would be best if we presented a united position. I copied his words into my journal beneath a receipt from the florist, where I once bought white lilies for Rick's mother. Their unity is only required when someone's watching. I didn't feel the need to write more. The final email came with a header that read, Legacy Matters Attendance Requested. It listed names I once recognized. Ashley, Walter Benjamin, even one of Rick's old college roommates. At the bottom, spouse of former chairman, chair left unassigned, pending RSVP. I deleted it, then emptied the trash bin. I didn't trust archives anymore. There was one more envelope. This one addressed to Peter Langford, marked confidential. Inside, I placed photocopies of every document Rick had kept in the metal safe beneath the garage tiles. Documents with other names, Laura Hartman, Daniel Whitaker. A third I never knew how to pronounce. I included no summary, no explanation, just a paperclip at the top of each section, and a note on yellow stationery. If they ever ask, tell them. I never needed to be cruel. Just clear. I dropped that envelope in a separate box. Priority, no tracking. I changed my phone number. Bought a prepaid device I kept in a drawer under old maps. Maggie had the number. No one else. One night, I stood outside with the hose turned low, watering the lavender I had trimmed too sharply the week before. The edges were starting to soften again. A single bloom leaned toward the walkway. I brushed it lightly with my sleeve. The scent stayed on my coat until morning. Driving past the old house became a silent practice. I didn't do it to check. It was on the way to the bookstore, and sometimes I forgot to turn early. The house had new siding. The wreath on the door was the wrong color. A porch swing had been replaced with a wide bench Rick would have never chosen. The address was still the same. Nothing else was. I parked beside the library the next afternoon. Inside, the children's section was quiet. Miss Lowe asked if I could alphabetize the new arrivals. I nodded. One book had a sticker half peeled at the spine, like someone had tried to change where it belonged. I smoothed it back down. That night, I opened the small green notebook I kept on the dresser. There were 4 names left unmarked. One of them was Rick Whitaker. I crossed it out. No flourish, no pressure. A steady line just once through the middle. I didn't tear the page out. I didn't write anything in its place. That was enough. I always noticed the way porcelain cooled faster than stoneware. The teacup lost its warmth within minutes, even with both hands wrapped around it. Rick had refused to use the set. Too delicate, he'd once said, brushing dust from its rim like he expected it to crumble under his breath. But I'd kept them anyway, 8 cups, 8 saucers, and the pot with the chip on the lid. This morning I chose the pot. I boiled water slowly, letting it hum rather than rush. 1 scoop of loose leaf, Earl Grey, no sugar. I'd stopped adding honey when the jar crystallized, and I didn't bother replacing it. The click of the lid closing felt lighter than I remembered. I let the kettle rest beside me as I opened the drawer. Inside, postcards from grocery stores, a folded note with Maggie's handwriting, looped almost rushed. "Don't forget who you are," it read. The ink had bled slightly, as if written during rain. Beneath that, a rubber-banded stack of birthday cards, none of them mailed. I had once imagined Rick opening them, maybe even smiling. Now, the thought didn't move. One envelope still bore Ashley's handwriting, flourished, calculated, a little too perfect. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I wrapped it in thin ribbon, the kind you find in candle shops, and slid it into the back corner of the drawer marked "Keep, but only for remembering." Outside the window, a squirrel darted along the railing and vanished into the sand of the roof. I cracked the glass a few inches and let the cold slip in. It smelled faintly of pine and something else I couldn't name. I pressed my palm to the windowsill. It steadied me. The sage plant on the ledge looked small but firm. I'd chosen it for the scent alone. No meaning attached. No story to tell, just something I liked. Its leaves curled slightly at the edges, textured like velvet worn thin. I moved it an inch closer to the light and wiped the base clean with my sleeve. A soft ping echoed from the phone face down beside me. I didn't reach for it. Maggie had texted last week, "Saw you walking." There's something solid in how you carry yourself now. I hadn't replied, but I remembered the exact walk. Hands in pockets, shoulder bag hanging from one side. No destination, no noise. I passed a man arguing on his phone and a dog with two differently coloured eyes. I'd paused at the library window to adjust my scarf, caught my reflection, and realised I hadn't thought about anyone else in hours. At school, the children call me Miss Whittaker. The librarian nameplate hadn't needed correcting. No one there asked about Rick. No one there called me Emily Hartman, or the widow, or the one from that article. I file books. I tape torn spines. I remind students to whisper. And when the bell rings at 3:15, I lock the door behind me and walk home without looking over my shoulder. The house doesn't echo anymore. It used to. When I moved in, every step seemed to ask a question. What now? What next? But I answered in small ways. A new curtain, a stack of local cookbooks from the thrift store. I replaced the broken knob on the hallway drawer. I planted rosemary, not because Rick liked it, but because I didn't know how to kill it. I hadn't heard from Walter Green again. I imagine his emails now begin with regrettably. The magazine headlines had stopped using my name weeks ago. A final article had read, "Silent in the Storm, Whittaker's first wife and the scandal she escaped." I'd underlined nothing in it. I kept no clippings. I reread a line from a journal entry I'd written in September. "There's power in not returning what you're asked to carry." I remember writing it after donating Rick's old cufflinks to a resale shop. The clerk had turned them over with Kia. "Nice gold finish," she noted. I just nodded. The lavender by the porch had started to brown around the edges, curling in on itself. I didn't trim it. I let it be. Things don't need to bloom to be valid. I returned to the kitchen and poured the tea, watching the swirl of steam disappear against the morning light. The cup trembled slightly when I set it down, not from my hand, but from the wobble of the old table leg I never fixed. I liked it that way. In a different drawer, not the one with the old cards I kept my journal. The pages had softened from frequent use corners, curling like worn leaves. I flipped to a blank line and wrote slowly without pressure. Today I don't need to be right. I just need to be real. No flourish. No signature. I let the pen rest diagonally across the page uncapped. The ink didn't bleed. I held the cup again, heat now bearable, not biting. I took a sip. No sugar, no honey, no additives, just the taste of tea like it was meant to be bitter at first, then something else if you waited long enough. I looked toward the window. The sage shimmered faintly in the wind. And I did nothing more.